Hey, welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS. In this episode, we talk about the ongoing battle against wildfires in Southern California, a region where the threat of wildfires persists year-round. For this conversation, we had the privilege of welcoming Desiree Horton and co-host Tony Weber to uncover the tireless efforts and evolving strategies employed by SoCal agencies to combat wildfires in a region where the fire season never truly ends. First, we have Desiree Horton, a trailblazer in public safety aviation, with over 3 decades of experience and more than 10,000 flight hours to her name. From her early days navigating the busy airspace of Southern California to becoming the first female pilot on an exclusive use contract for Region 5 with the U.S. Forest Service, Horton's journey is one of perseverance and groundbreaking achievements. Currently serving as a fire rescue pilot for the Kern County Fire Department, she continues to inspire and pave the way for women in the industry. Joining Desiree Horton on the podcast is Tony Weber, a seasoned helicopter pilot with a distinguished background in law enforcement and firefighting with over 9,000 flight hours, extensive experience in mountainous terrain, and a strong dedication to safety demonstrated through his certifications and training. Weber's expertise is truly exceptional. His decorated career at the San Diego County Sheriff's Department, where he rose the position of corporal/fire rescue pilot, showcases his commitment to public service and his invaluable contributions to search and rescue missions. Together, Desiree Horton and Tony Weber bring a wealth of knowledge, experience, and passion for aviation to the Hangar Z podcast, offering listeners unique insight into the world of public safety aviation and firefighting. This podcast recording is done in conjunction with an article in the summer issue of Vertical Valor magazine. Go to Vertical Valor online to check out the fantastic writing and content in the summer issue. Thank you to our sponsors, CNC Technologies, Metro Aviation, and Bell. Cheers.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Hey, welcome to Hangar Z podcast. I'm your host, John Gray. Have a really cool conversation in store for today. This conversation's going to be kind of in line with an article that Vertical Valor is writing. And the topic of the article and the topic of our conversation is going to be how Southern California agencies are dealing with the year-round fire season. And I know, going back to my early days when I worked for the Forest Service, there was a defined fire season that typically for me started in May. And I usually, as a seasonal firefighter, get laid off in November. And the idea of wintertime fires wasn't very common. And it seems like that's changed. So to have the conversation and to kind of explore this idea, we brought Tony Weber in to co-host the conversation. How you doing, Tony?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back. And thank you for inviting my friend Desiree. I believe this is the first time we've gotten to do a podcast together. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, this is awesome. And like you said, Desiree Horton, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And happy to be here with both of you. This is awesome.
Yeah. Anytime I'm in a room with Tony Weber, it's made my day.
Here we go. Here we go.
So it's oddly enough, Jack Shanley and I were talking about you. We're in DC and he kept referring to you as his favorite firefighter. So I thought I should relay
that. You know what? And I usually bow to the king when it comes to Jack Shanley. And then I was going to say, hey, I got to ask you if I can add another podcast to mine so maybe I can catch up to him and get to his greatness.
Oh, this is awesome. You guys, the collective experience between the two of you and public safety aviation, in particular fire, is pretty awesome. So I'm excited to dig into this concept of the year-round fire season. I know both of you have worked at agencies that you've dealt with that and currently do as well. This season's fresh. It's as we record this, it's the end of May. So even if this were a traditional year, this is kind of the traditional beginning of what would be a fire season. And I know you guys have already been running some fires and dealing with that. So excited to dig into that. I do have to get into drink of the day, though. We'll keep this brief. trying to keep time in mind here. So I'll start knowing that I was going to record with Tony and Desiree. Had to bring the heat. So I brought in a Woodford Reserve whiskey on the rocks. So that's my drink of the day. It is early, so I knew I was rolling the dice, but we'll see what happens after this.
That does look tasty. I'm jealous.
Yep.
That looks really good. Is that a big ice cube in there?
Yep.
Is that nice?
That's
Giant molded
that's
ice.
proper right there.
Yeah, big time.
Tony, what's your drink of the day?
Well, like you said, it is still early, and I'm just getting over a cold. So I'm going to go with the very fancy your Costco Kirkland sparkling water. So
Okay.
I'm just going to roll with that today.
All right. Got to hydrate at some point.
Oh yeah.
Desiree?
We've got a polar seltzer, black cherry.
Okay.
Black cherry.
Sparkling water.
Well, you guys are well hydrated. I'll pull the wagon on this one with whiskey in the rocks. But again, happy to be with you guys and to discuss this, and really just a fortunate opportunity for me to be able to work in conjunction with Vertical Valor. So thankful to be a part of MHM and what they're doing. It's so cool to see these different media forms come together. And I think for me as a consumer, when I read something I'm interested in, I'd like to see if there's video or audio that accompanies that. I think it's really interesting. So I love the idea, and it's cool to contribute to the industry in that way. So thank you guys for contributing and for hanging out.
Yeah, always happy to be here.
Well, let's for folks that may not have heard the podcast that you guys have been on previously, and Tony, we'll start with you. Can you just tell us where you work, what your current role is, and how long you've been in public safety and public safety aviation?
I'm a fire rescue pilot for San Diego County Sheriff's Aviation Division. I've been on the Sheriff's Department for 42 years. So again, you guys can cue the old man jokes if you want right now. It's totally fine. Out of the 42, I've been flying in the aviation division for 32 years. And again, I'm in the fire rescue side of the aviation division.
So just a little bit of experience. Not much to offer.
Just a little bit.
I forget who it was now, but somebody referred to as the burning bush of hoist work. It might have been, it was one of the SR3 guys, and it made me laugh. It might have been Rob Monday.
It's either great. Rob or Dave. And they're always busting me, so it's all good natured. But Dave, Dave Callan, that guy will put some handles on you and some nicknames in a heartbeat. But it's all good times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great group of guys.
Yep. Desiree, can you fill us in on your background and where you currently are?
I'm a fire rescue pilot for Kern County Fire Department. I've been with them for about 4 years. I'm also their aviation safety officer. And prior to that, I worked for CAL FIRE and then a small stint at Orange County Fire. And then before that, I was with the Forest Service, contracting them for years. So I believe this year will be either my 19th or 20th fire season. And I've been flying for 34 years total. Became a pilot 34 years ago. Dating myself.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we're all in the shining later half of our careers, and it's pretty cool to look back on all the things you did in the beginning and kind of how that went to where you are now, right? And the experience you have, and it's fun to look back on that. To that point, looking back to your early years of the Forest Service, what was your first year that you recall working with the Forest Service?
My first year, I didn't go full time. I actually was trying to still work at my full-time job in the LA area, where I was employed by Helinet Aviation, doing charter, news, all sorts of missions that they did. And I was working as a CWM pilot. And I remember, I believe my first fire was in Arizona. It was either Arizona or it was Texas. I don't know. There were so many fires, but it was pretty cool. I just remember thinking, I want to do this full time. And so the following year, I was put on an exclusive use contract in Independence. And I spent 2 years there on a rappel contract in a Type 3. And that was challenging for a new pilot. The elevations they go up to, you have Mount Whitney at 14,000 feet. So pretty much a lot of the terrain we're operating in was extreme altitudes, winds. The terrain was just very challenging for someone that was basically my first season as a full-time exclusive use fire pilot.
Yeah, that area is beautiful. I've been through there a lot of times. Spent time in Bishop, spent time in Mammoth, and of course, driving up there, you go through Independence and all those areas. And that's when you get to Independence, you feel like you're through the worst part of the drive, and you're like, oh, okay, it's getting pretty now. And I feel like I remember seeing your base off the highway, so that must have been really cool. What year was that roughly?
That was either 05 or 06 that I was there for. Yeah, I think it was 06, 07 now that I think about it, because 2005 was the year I was on CWN fire contracts.
My last fire season with the Forest Service was 2003. So it just missed you.
Ah.
But yeah, the Forest Service is awesome. You talk about the opportunity to go to, different states and different areas to fight fires. You never knew if you got a strike team assignment where you were going to go, where you're going to end up. And I thought that was always really cool. While I didn't go very far, I still got to go out of the area quite a bit. And I like those assignments. And I guess the older you get, the more difficult it becomes to prepare for those types of things. And, you don't want to be away from home and away from family more than you have to. So I understand, that changes over time. But as a young firefighter, that was fun for me. What was your experience when you first started? Were you gone all the time?
I was gone all the time, and it definitely took its toll on everything: family, friendships, relationships, pets that I had that I couldn't care for, that I had to hire people to take care of. It was hard being gone, and I felt like I spent the entire first half of my fire career living out of a suitcase, living in hotels or at the base. And it wasn't until I got picked up with Cal Fire that I thought I finally was able to have a stable home life where we didn't fly at night. We didn't do all risk 24-hour shifts. So I was home every night, which was amazing. And now I'm back to being gone a lot.
Yeah, that's tough. I know for you, Tony, you've had a kind of a different experience with San Diego County. Can you talk about your experience and how that's been with fire assignments? And I know you guys don't go out of the area. You're dedicated to the San Diego area, but can you talk about what that's like?
Yeah, we, unlike Desiree, we don't get deployed outside of San Diego. We're really fortunate. It's the San Diego Sheriff's Department. All our fires are 95% of the time in our county, and we don't get deployed. It's fortunate for us because if you say you do a fire and you start at sun up and you end up at sundown, you still get to go home every night. And, you're not living out of a hotel room or a helibase. So we got it pretty good. When you're doing firefighting on the law enforcement side, you're a little more fortunate in that regard to where, you're not living out of a suitcase. So we have it pretty good. So we are in partnership with Cal Fire, and we got our medium helicopters in 2005. And we've been in partnership with them since then. And I think we're now in California, we may be the only law enforcement agency that is carrying Cal Fire HeliTAC crews. And Desiree, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're the only ones left.
Yeah, I think so. You're right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting partnership and one that's super beneficial. Can you talk about the creation of that partnership? And also, can you talk about the reason why San Diego is why you guys don't deploy out of the San Diego area?
I'll go back as far as a lot of the wildland fires that we had in San Diego. A lot of them were very destructive. We had the Harris fire, the Witch fire, lots of homes burned, a lot of fatalities. When that kept happening in San Diego and everybody realized we did not really have a lot of aerial firefighting assets, it started out with the county of San Diego buying us two medium Bells. It was the Bell 205 A1++. And that happened in 2005. And Cal Fire came down with some of their training pilots and actually trained the first four of us. And I was part of that group. And then we started a partnership with them where they provided the captains and the HeliTAC crews for our two helicopters. And now we're up to four. But over the years, it's morphed into not only having a HeliTAC crew, we've cross-trained our Cal Fire partners as hoist rescue crews. So from 2005 to today, when I'm talking to you about it, it's been a great partnership. And again, we started off with two mediums and now we're up to four, and the partnership is still going strong.
Wow. Do you guys get to go to their state training facility for any of the stuff that you're doing?
We don't, but the hoist operators that we have trained in-house, they still all get to go up to the Cal Fire training facility up in Sacramento, and they still get to go through their full hoist training course. So they kind of get a different look working out of a hawk as opposed to working out of a medium. So they're cross-trained pretty good. Our rescue techniques are a little different, and I think any rescue agency you would go to, you would always find there's little differences. I'm sure if I went up to Desiree's and looked at their rescue equipment and how they did their procedures, is it pretty close? Yeah. Is it different? Sure. So yeah, they get cross-trained in everything Cal Fire, but we do train them a specific way for how we do it in San Diego.
Yeah, that's cool. Desiree, for you, having spent time with Cal Fire, did you get an opportunity to go up to their statewide training facility? And if you did, what was that like?
I think actually the first year I was there, they sent us to Ione for the hoist training. But after that, we didn't go back. It wasn't an annual thing. I was there just once. That was a really good experience because the training that we got and the mock-ups and the helicopter props and then just all of the pilots and then working with all of the different captains that were being trained to do crew chief work. It was a really good experience for sure.
I've only seen pictures of that facility, and the pictures I've seen, it looks really cool.
Yeah, it is. We stayed on base, so there was dorms there. It's basically a fire academy, and so when I was sent there, I believe it was for a week, I basically lived in the facility. We didn't even get put in hotels, so we were just kind of thrown into it. Yeah, it was more time away from home, but it was worth it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, looking at where you guys work, San Diego, most people think of the beach and think of San Diego, but the county, as you go east, becomes, I would almost call it high desert-esque. Can you talk about the county and where you guys spend a majority of your time as a fire response and the kind of fuels that you guys encounter during those fires most of the time?
In San Diego County, we have 4,200 square miles. And like you said, it goes from the city of San Diego all the way out through where our air base is in El Cajon, kind of starts getting rural there. And then you start getting up into our foothills all the way up through the lagunas. And then to the north, you have Palomar Mountain. You actually have timber. And then we still have desert fires where we're putting out, cactus and some scrub brush. So we have all these different areas in San Diego, and then you add to that, we have some interesting challenges to where we have the U.S.-Mexican border. There's times where we'll be right on that borderline waiting for the fire to cross over to our side. That happens quite often. And then we spend a lot of time up at the Camp Pendleton Marine Corps base because they torch off their own fires with the live fire drills. So we find ourselves up on the Marine Corps base also. So you got this big, huge area and nothing's ever the same. You get a little bit different every day.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different interesting aspects to that. The Pendleton aspect is really interesting. But going to the border of Mexico, how does that work? Can you talk about, I know there's in my mind, there's probably not a partnership, but the fires, just like criminals, don't know boundaries when it comes to international borders. So can you talk about what it looks like if you were to have a fire that's burning south across the border? What happens in that scenario?
Well, we usually get called right before it's coming up to the border wall because somebody's usually watching it up on a peak, one of our ground assets. We'll show up there and, we are told not to fly south of the border, but they do come across. And I will say Mexico really doesn't have a, fire aviation assets. I think even their ground resources are pretty much non-existent. So when a fire starts south of the border, they just let it go. And then when it hits and then comes across the wall, it becomes our problem.
Wow. Yeah. I think back to all the programs that, get, they get uniforms and safety equipment for either the police departments or the fire departments. And they're sending stuff that has been used here in the States for quite a long time down there, but it's better than what they've got, which is almost nothing. It's a really interesting way they're doing things down there. You've talked about everything from heavy timber to cactus as far as fuels. I realize as we're talking about this, can you talk about the role that the different fuel types play in fire behavior for the folks that are listening who may not have a understanding of that?
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical HeliCasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what's burning. I mean, I've been to some fires that are down here, in the lower part of our foothills, and you've had a pretty good winter season. We don't have a lot of good rain down here in San Diego, but the few times that we have, next thing you know, the grass crop is 3 and 4 feet tall. And, it looks all really cool when it's all green in the wintertime. But once that dries out and you get on a grass fire, and Desiree will tell you this, man, you get a little wind on that and those things burn hot and fast. So, and you're kind of just chasing them. And then it starts to move up into the sumac and then your manzanita. And it just depends on what's burning, how thick it is. I think the biggest problem for us down here in Southern California isn't so much the brush that's burning. For us, our worst fires are the wind-driven Santa Ana fires.
Yeah.
A normal fire that's not, being pushed by wind, those are manageable. But you start getting 30, 40, and 50 knot winds, and some of our worst fires down here in San Diego were the Santa Ana wind-driven fires, where it's coming out of the east and heading west.
Yep.
And there's a lot of places in the country that does firefighting that they don't have that dynamic. And it is a really crazy dynamic that we deal with here all the way up to where Desiree's at, the LA basin. And those type of fires, you're really not putting them out. You're just steering them. There really is no way to put those out.
Right. There's a company they're developing autonomous firefighting aircraft, and their statement is that they will eliminate wildfires as they exist currently. I'm like, well, that could be true for these normal fires like we're talking about.
Right.
What happens in these wind-driven fire events where aircraft can't even fly, So I like the idea, and that they're progressively looking at ways to change our interaction with fire. But you look at these scenarios, the wind-driven fires are one that, good luck, So I don't know,
Yeah.
Desiree, for you, you've had a chance to fly in a lot of windy conditions. Encompassing where you are currently as well. But what's your experience been with wind-driven fires?
Tagging on to what Tony said, the same thing. A lot of our fires, the wind is the major driving force. Of course, the terrain, and we have a lot of mountains in the area. So, you get those preheated afternoon fires and fires racing up the slope, but you throw some wind on it and now you get the spotting. And that's the hard part, is trying to catch the spot fires. We've had fires where spotting activity is a half mile to sometimes even a mile, and starting a whole new fire. So that's when it becomes really difficult. And in Kern County, we have a lot of winds. I think I talked about that in the last interview. It's just a very windy area. They do wind studies in that area, and due to the terrain and the influence from the cooler Sierra Mountains down to the desert, we just have a lot of wind shift going on there. So it can make it very challenging for us.
For those that didn't hear our conversation that we recorded previously, can you talk about Kern County, where it lies, and some of the geographical references you're talking about?
Kern County is actually, I believe, over 8,000 square miles. It's the third largest county in California, although not as heavily populated as some of the counties such as San Diego or LA County. But we have a very large response area, and we're based in Keene, California, or Keene right off the 58. And we will go as far north as almost Porterville to San Luis Obispo and down to Edwards Air Force Base, Ridgecrest. That's kind of our border there. And then Fort Tejon, which butts up against LA County, and then Taft to the west. So sometimes we'll respond to a fire and it'll take us 30, 40 minutes just to get to the fire. That's how large our response area is.
And as far as fuels go, what kind of vegetation are you guys dealing with?
We have pretty much everything that anyone in Southern California has. It's the same all over. We just have a diverse area with the deserts and the grass, and then you go up into the tall timber and the Sierras and the other surrounding mountains, which presents a challenge. But it's typically those grass fires that are the ones that are keeping us really busy really fast.
For you in Kern County, are you seeing kind of what we're talking about with the year-round firefighting season?
For us, a lot of it is the early spring, the warm springs. For example, this year, I didn't see the poppies that we had last year. Our spring came quicker and then it went. And our winter was short. Normally, we would have snow a lot later. That snowpack that we got over the winter, it melted sooner with that warm spring. And last month, was that April? We already were into fire season. So it was like a whole month earlier than usual for us, where we're busy. And if you look on Pulse Point, we're getting vegetation fires every day. Every day that I'm not on shift, I'm getting the alerts and the notices. And the last few shifts I was on, we were going to 1 to 2 fires a day and even fires at night. It's been keeping us really busy for sure.
What about over the winter months? Are you seeing vegetation fires kick off in your area during the winter months?
For us, not so much, because we are up in the southern Sierras, so we do get snow. Unlike the LA areas and San Diego, I'm actually driving through the snow to get to work. We have that snowpack on the ground, on the mountains. The grass is pretty wet. We have the rains, we have the flooding. So we go to a lot of rescues in the winter, and we end up getting like Tony was talking about, the flashier fuels come spring and summer because of all that growth due to the rain that we had. So not a lot of fires in the winter. We have more rescues over the winter than we do fires for us anyway. But then our fire season does start a lot earlier and keeps us busier. I believe we've been having more fires than where I was working prior, when I was working for Cal Fire and Orange County Fire. We're definitely having more fire activity than they were this time of year.
So to what you're talking about, for the folks that are listening, the moisture content is really what determines the combustibility of the fuels. So the wetter the fuels are, the less likely they are to burn. The drier they are, the more likely they are to catch fire and for that fire to spread rapidly. If you're in an environment like Desiree is talking about, where you've got a lot of moisture in the ground, the fire season typically doesn't continue. Whereas you look at LA County, Orange County, San Diego County, a lot drier environments. And Tony, you can speak to that on your side in San Diego. Can you talk about what you guys are seeing year round in your area?
Like Desiree said, we started chasing fires already in April, and then in the May, they're just already increasing. You don't hear about them yet because a lot of the smaller fires, we hit them so hard and we put them out. You don't even hear about them on the news because it becomes commonplace. You're only hearing about the bigger fires now. But in San Diego, I would say the further south you go, the drier it gets. We really don't get a lot of rain down here, and they're not big fires, but we're still getting fires in the typical winter months down here. And again, it dries out quicker down here in San Diego. We did get a lot of rain this winter, which is not typical for us, but all that did for us was boost the grass crop, made the brush even thicker. So I'm actually expecting a heavy fire season down here.
It's interesting. You think rain is good in most places, but then the inverse sometimes is bad because of that grass crop you talk about, how it burns so hot and fast. It's easy to ignite that grass. A simple car driving into the grass, that catalytic converter can ignite that grass and it just takes off. For you, talking to some of the folks that may be working in Riverside, Orange County, LA County, are they experiencing the same phenomenon that you're talking about with the fires kind of year round?
Yeah, I think all the way up into Riverside, I think they're getting pretty much what we're getting. Riverside dries out pretty quick. I don't know so much about LA. We hear a lot about Riverside because it'll come over the common Cal Fire radio and the dispatching. So I'll hear that, but I'm not sure if LA County Basin is dried out yet and they're already chasing the amount of fires that we are.
Desiree, are you hearing much on that side?
I'm not hearing much on that side, but when I was with Cal Fire, I was there from, I started with them in 2013 and left in 2019. And in 2014, I was down in San Bernardino County on helicopter 305. And I remember it was January, like first or second week in January 2014, there was the Colby fire that started there in the Angeles, and it burned for over a week, like maybe almost 10 days. And it burned hard and it burned fast. And it had rained for, I think, a week prior. So I was just blown away that it was burning like that in January down there. We don't get that in Kern County because there's still snow on the ground in January. But I remember actually going to fires with Tony when I was with CAL FIRE. We would go down to San Diego, and it was December, January, and it would be raining, and heavy rains too. Not the kind of rains we get now where it sprinkles for a couple days, but it would rain really hard, and then we get a fire that afternoon. And I remember my guys getting back into the helicopter with mud all over their boots and their tools, and fire was still burning. Even they were scraping line in the mud. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's wild. For you, do you have any insight on how and when this idea of the year-round fire season began?
Call it climate change or global warming, whatever you want. But there's so many factors. I mean, obviously, we have longer summers. We have shorter springs. We have shorter winters. We have drier winters. We have more of an infestation of invasive species of plants that create that fuel that becomes an issue. We have more like the bark beetles, the infestation killing a lot of the trees. There's just so many factors, and then just the urban interface, more development in areas that were once more undeveloped and more remote. I think a lot of those things play into factors, because I've been now fighting fire in Southern California since 2004 or 2005. And I remember going to areas thinking, gosh, there weren't homes here years ago when I was fighting fire. And now all of a sudden there's homes. So now there's more risk, there's more loss. And that's kind of what I see. And then there's more people, there's more activities, and the more people you have out there, the more chance of fires starting. 90% of fires are started by humans. Mm-hmm. So that's a big factor as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of the biggest factors driving what we're seeing is what you're saying. You look at when you fly around Southern California, you look at, they're literally digging into mountainsides to create more space to build homes. And then any other space that's not in a mountain that's accessible and you can build, they're building there. I just saw an announcement for 15,000 homes are going to be built in the Summit Valley area by Lake Silverwood in San Bernardino County. 15,000 homes in an area that can't support that number. And that, it sits in an area where there's no doubt there's going to be fires that start as a result of the human interaction in that urban interface environment. Trying to be cautious of the words that I use, because I think it's sometimes it's fireese. Like a lot of people that are in fire understand urban interface, but for folks that aren't in fire and don't really understand the concept of urban interface, Desiree, can you kind of talk about what that term means?
It's basically homes and structures or businesses in areas that are not developed. So it's that interface where all of a sudden you have more homes against an area that is undeveloped. So that when the fires come, down the mountain in those areas that are burning, now you have all these homes bordering those areas. Trying to think of some good examples, but I mean, just even the Colby fire I was talking about in 2014 on the Angeles, they have all these multi-million-dollar beautiful homes built at the bottom of that mountain range that weren't there 15, 20 years ago. When that fire comes down that mountain, now all of those homes are at risk that once weren't there. So that would kind of be an example of how I would explain it.
Absolutely. Tony, I know you guys are seeing that in East County, San Diego, all this kind of what used to be undeveloped land with vegetation everywhere. Now you've got exactly what she said, all these multi-million-dollar homes that are being built. How's that affected your guys' response to those fires?
I mean, I think our responses are still pretty much the same. But when you start looking out, when I was doing this in 2005, and I think ahead till now, in all the areas that I fly over that were not, they didn't have any homes on them, out in the wildland urban interface area. And now I fly over and I'll see some new development, and we'll all comment with the houses are still being built, and we'll look at the terrain and the brush and one road in and one road out. And you just look at that and you go, you get a good fire here, they're in trouble. You can see it from the air. But with that said, it doesn't seem to slow down development. I mean, I'm sure when they develop these areas in these wildland fire areas, and I'm sure they're being advised that, hey, if there's a big fire here, this one road in or one road out is not going to cut it.
Right.
I'm not sure anybody's listening anymore because they keep building them.
I think the only people that are listening are the insurance companies because they're dropping coverage for all these people. And my community is in a forested area, and most of the major insurers have left, and we're now faced with the only option of going with the state-funded fire insurance. And we all know how well state-funded insurance programs go. State-funded anything, especially in California, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure Desiree's seen it. I'll fly around San Diego, and there'll be, it seems like these multi-million-dollar homes. A lot of them will go to the top of the peak, shave the top of the peak off. There's a road that comes up, and it's a $10 million home. And then you fly by it and go, man, if there's a fire right here, they are truly in trouble. I mean, there's no way around it. And I see that even more now. And I'm just wondering what the thought process is.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
Desiree, any thoughts on that?
The same. I mean, we see homes at the bottom of drainages down in canyons or laced along the entire hill from the bottom to the top up where I am in Kern County. If that mountain to the southwest of us was ever to take off, there's just so many homes riddled on the side of that hill, deep in the vegetation. And there's obviously fire clearance requirements, and they do what's required, but that's never really enough. When you have a big fire rip through there, it doesn't matter how much clearance you have, those flames are going to lap over and get your house regardless.
I think of fires, and at least when I was doing it, I'm sure it's the same now. Whenever you get a fire and there's an urban interface element to that, and there's structural protection that's required, you're going to get a huge response that goes to those fires. So what that requires then is a larger budget to help fight these fires. So when you look at the budget that's allocated to not only the state and these, county agencies, but the federal government, how have you guys seen those changes kind of take place to address the additional resources that are being required to fight these fires?
I will jump in here and just cover San Diego. When we started in 2005, we got our 2 helicopters, and that still wasn't enough. And I look now, when we go to a fire now in San Diego, and, we went to one last week, we went to 2 fires. We have our 4 mediums across the runway. San Diego Gas and Electric has 2 Type 1 Hawks. They got a Sky Crane on retainer year round for us. The Forest Service brings in a Type 1 every year, and Cal Fire brings on another Type 1 helicopter, and then we got our fixed wing assets. So it's kind of gotten really good in San Diego to where you can't throw a rock and not hit a firefighting helicopter. We got them everywhere now. And the reason for that is we learned our lessons in the past where we didn't have assets in county, and how devastating it was, and learning from those lessons. So at least for San Diego County, I think we have it really good now for firefighting assets.
That's awesome.
Those were hard lessons learned, and that's why it is what it is now.
I think a lot of what you're talking about, or at least some of what you're talking about, is privately funded firefighting equipment that comes through the utility companies, which is really cool. Can you talk about their involvement in this segment?
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
For SDG&E, for that crane that they have on contract year round, it's not just for what you think is a typical fire season. And for the first 3 hours, San Diego Gas and Electric, the first 3 hours on any new fire, that's coming out of their pocket. So it's a huge asset for us. We go out on initial attack with our 2 helicopters, air attack, 2 fixed wing. And then we get on scene and we see that fire is going to get big or has the potential to get big. They call in the crane and or one of the Hawks from SDG&E right away. And it's there for us all the time. It's year round. So it's a great asset that is coming from a company that's not a true firefighting entity.
It's interesting to see how they've become involved. And you look at some of the big fires, like Paradise is one that comes to mind, where ultimately the utility companies were responsible for the fires that started, even though they were ignited during wind events. Those are things you can't really control. They were held financially responsible for those.
Yes.
So it's neat to see them try and come up with a solution to deal with that. And it's beneficial for all the folks living in San Diego County and in Southern California. I think you're seeing a lot of that. Desiree, any insight on that?
I mean, I was just thinking about the wires that went down. I mean, a lot of the wires that go down in those wind events are just older infrastructure. It's older wooden towers and too many trees in the area. And so there's so many factors, and we see a lot of that. But as far as like resources for us, we're very spread out. We're the only helicopter in our immediate area. And then, as I mentioned before, it could take up to 30 minutes to get to any of the fires. And in the winter, we don't have other aerial assets in the area. We rely on the Forest Service contracts, which come on, obviously, in the summer. And so they're spread out. They're down in Lancaster. They're up near Lake Isabella, Porterville. There's nothing to the west. And to the north, as I mentioned, is Porterville. And then as far as CAL FIRE goes, you have as far as Hollister before you have the next one. So we're pretty spread out, and we will get a lot of resources. We'll get the Type 1s that come out of Lancaster to come help us out in the summer months. Like, they're already on contract now, so we get help from those guys. CAL FIRE actually came out to a fire all the way from Chino. And
wow.
I'm looking at a map right now, and I'm just blown away. I remember when I was flying there, how far we would go. We would go up to Bishop and Lone Pine for fires. So for them to come to Kern County wasn't unusual. We used to go to Kern County all the time when I was working for CAL FIRE, but it was really nice to have them come out and help us out on this fire, because it started at the bottom of a road in the canyon where the Kern River is, and it just went up the side of the hill. It was windy that day. That canyon just had a lot of wind influence based on the topography and the terrain, and our Huey would definitely struggle trying to put that out by ourselves. And we had tankers out there as well doing drops, and it was very effective, and we got it out within a half day of firefighting.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind at Southern California being kind of a desertous environment, the water sources are difficult to come by. And as Tony, you guys in San Diego County have come up with a pretty genius infrastructure of water sources. Can you talk about how that came about and what you guys, or how you're utilizing them?
In San Diego County, you're right. During the bigger, longer droughts, the summer droughts, some of our smaller ponds were drying up. And then next thing you know, you had to go to one of the larger lakes. And sometimes the turnaround times between the fire and your water source at a lake were too long. I mean, you're getting, a drop in every, 8 to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It got pretty bad. So one of the things we started doing here in San Diego is putting dedicated, they're called helihydrants. And they put them just downhill from an established water tank. And so we have one in Fallbrook now. We have one in San Marcos, and then we have one just above the Wild Animal Park. And so we're slowly starting to get those spread out around San Diego County to where they're really nice. You show up on scene, go to a specific VHF frequency, click 6 times. Next thing you know, you see the water filling that thing up.
Wow.
And you can just dip out of that thing all day long. And it's a cement helihydrant.
That's
and I'll
cool.
tell you what, they are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, even the name helihydrant's pretty cool.
Yeah.
If there's not a patent on that, you got to trademark that name.
Exactly.
That's cool. Desiree, any experience with those?
I had experience with those one year that I was at Orange County Fire. They had implemented one of those on the foothills to the east of where we were based out of, where they had a lot of fires along the freeway. And it was same thing like Tony said. You just dial in a frequency, click the mic switch, and there it goes, filled with water. But it was right next to some homes. So anytime we went in there for training or to practice, we really had to be careful. There was multi-million-dollar homes very close to it. Yeah, it was definitely cool to have. We don't need that or have that so much out in Kern County. Everything's so spread out, and it'd be very difficult to maintain and have those. But we do have some homeowners, some private residences that have dip tanks. There's one guy he's a neighbor who lives just west of our helibase, and we get so many fires in that area that he actually, I don't know if the tank was built for us or he already had the tank there and made it available, but it's just perfectly on the side of the hill. And anytime he hears a fire, he goes out there and he turns it on, and we're dipping out of it all day long.
That's
and
awesome.
If we didn't,
That's cool.
yeah, it's great. And if we didn't have access to that, our turnarounds would be 15 minutes at least. There's no water close to where a lot of those fires, and those fires that we're going to are usually either off the highway there or the train. Every summer, the train goes through there, and there's just fires the whole summer long because of that.
Yeah, we had that a lot too in the Cajon Pass. Those trains throw a brake shoe, and that brake shoe's smoking hot, and it goes into the brush and starts a fire. So going back to something you brought up with the house and the homeowner kind of having his own dip site, what's the most interesting or unique place that you found yourself dipping water out of?
Oh, I was going to say his dip tank, it's pretty small and it's not metal. So if you drag the snorkel on the side, you're going to break it. It's some type of plastic. I don't know. I mean, we've gotten water out of, like, I don't want to say the poop ponds, but the reclaimed water, sometimes that's all you got.
Yeah. Some of the pictures you see coming out of these fires, you see just that, the water drop coming out of a helicopter. It's all like, you're like, what is that? That's not water. It's poo water.
You don't want to drop on your guys, that's for sure.
But Tony, for you, what's the most interesting place that you found yourself dipping?
I think back in the day when we were still running buckets, we didn't have any fire assets. So I'll cover two interesting ones. There's a multi-million-dollar home here in San Diego out in the San Marcos area. And this guy had one of those pools that started inside his house and went all the way out to his lawn area. And it was on one of those peaks.
Dang.
And one of our 500s, fire was coming up the hill towards his house. And he sent us a picture of us dipping out of that pool. And, the first time you go in there, you're sending the patio furniture and everything just gets yard sailed. So we still have that picture on the wall, and it's pretty interesting. And the guy thanked us. I think we broke some of his furniture, but he didn't care. But the thing is for the 205s, if we have to, and I know we've probably ruined a lot of golf games, but we'll go into those golf course ponds. And I know, some people find it fascinating, but I know we've probably upset a few golfers over the years. But if that's the closest water source is a golf course pond, we have done that quite a bit of times.
Yeah, there's a video. I know you guys have seen it. It's I think it's in a golf course in Fontana, California. It's Santa Ana wind event, or at least it looks like it. The palm trees are bent in half.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a crane dipping out of a water feature.
I did.
And you can see the trees are just like bent over. I'm like, whoa, that looks crazy. But to what you're talking about,
I will say I do miss fighting fire in Southern California, as far as like down in the LA area and San Bernardino where I was, and even with Tony down in San Diego, because we were using golf courses all the time, and it was fun. I do remember this one time out in Riverside, I was dipping out of a golf course and no one stopped golfing. And I was worried one of those balls was going to go through the rotor system. They didn't care. That's how common it was. There's so many fires every summer that these golfers just weren't even fazed by it. They didn't stop what they were doing. We've dipped out of water sources at golf courses where there was a wedding going on and there's a wedding party there, and so it happens.
You use it as a photo op for the wedding.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. It is so common in Southern California that people, I don't want to say that they don't pay attention to it, but it is common. And you're seeing that not just in Southern California, you're seeing it in other places throughout the world. Any insight as to where those other locations are and kind of why they might be experiencing the same thing? Then I'll open that up to either Tony or Desiree.
You talking about just longer fire seasons?
Yeah, longer fire seasons and fire seasons where you're seeing, like Southern California, you've got fires all over the place. The frequency of them is pretty high.
Yeah, the past 5 and 10 years, I can't tell you how many times I'm seeing crazy fire seasons over in Greece, Italy, Australia, and notoriously, the one I'll focus on is over in Greece. I kept seeing a lot of our assets getting sent over there because they were just having all of a sudden, these horrible fire seasons. And then you got to wonder, is it, climate change, global warming? I just don't know how much people buy into that. But I will say here, at least in Southern California, in my opinion, in San Diego, the summers just keep getting hotter, and it seems like the length of the summer is going longer. So I don't know if you're going to pin that on global warming or climate change. I don't know, but the temperatures have definitely changed. I've noticed it.
Yeah. As a kid, I remember living in the mountains. Our winter season, the snow season, would start in middle November.
Yeah.
And it would be heavy in December and January. And if you got a snowstorm in March that was heavy, it was a big deal. I remember as a kid, we had one storm that was called the March Miracle. And as a kid, I was happy because I didn't have school for like a week because we had snow days.
Yeah. Yeah. Snow days.
But now it seems like our snow season starts in February and goes through the end of March, beginning of April, which is really interesting. And again, I don't know if I buy into all the scientific theories either, but it's hard. There's something happening. I just don't know what that is. So, Desiree, any insight from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, just what I've read and what I've seen on the news. I don't fight fire, or we don't have helicopters or crews that go out of the country, but I hear about Canada getting worse. I've heard that they've had the worst fire season in decades. So they're experiencing the climate change. It's warmer, drier, not as much snow, shorter winters. So they're definitely being affected. And as Tony mentioned, Australia, but I was reading somewhere that Australia said, well, pretty much everything's burned. So there's, they weren't expecting like a very busy season for 2024 because there's nothing left. Where I think like here, as Tony and I talked about, we get the winters, or at least we do in Kern County. And so we have all this new growth. So we have fresh fuel every summer. It hasn't all burned up yet. We have a lot of like I said before, over 8,000 square miles. And it's just a matter of if someone goes out there and starts it. And we still do get a lot of lightning fires. We do get the weather, and that's cool. I actually enjoy the lightning fires and watching those. Not as far as like watching them start, but just going outside at night and watching the lightning in the sky, and then just knowing like, we're going to have a busy day the next day.
I love that too. I love the sound of thunderstorms and seeing the lightning.
Yeah. I still geek out on that. I mean, it's so crazy. I've been flying 34 years, and I'll go outside, and I have an old iPhone. I don't have the newest one. I think it's like 5 years old, and I will still like go out there and take night pictures. They look terrible compared to the newer iPhones, but I'll capture the Milky Way, the stars, the lightning during the winters.
That's awesome.
We actually, I know this is kind of off subject, but talking about the night sky, what was that, like about a month ago, there was that satellite or some type of, it was something from China that came through the atmosphere, and it came apart. And we were on a night rescue when that happened. We happened to be out. Yeah, it was actually a search and rescue, and we were out from 1 a.m. till 5 a.m, and we did 2 fuel cycles on this, and we eventually got the girl out of there. She was at the bottom of a canyon that we couldn't even get into. It was so tight and so narrow, and we didn't have enough cable, and the winds were extreme. But while we were out there, that debris flew right over us, and it was the most incredible thing. It was just so cool.
Wow, that would have been cool to see.
Yeah, and we were on, you're on goggles. Yeah, on goggles. It was incredible. So yeah,
that's
very
awesome.
Cool.
One thing I'll bring up, and this I think does have an impact in the fire size, and when you look at how the Forest Service on a federal level has handled fuel management over the years, there was a long time where the Forest Service really kind of had a hands-off approach to forest management. They didn't want fires to start, and when they did start, they'd put them out as fast as they could. So what happened is you had this large fuel growth that took place that went unmanaged for 30, 40, 50 years. And now when fires start in these areas, you're seeing explosive growth because of the density of the fuels, and combine that with low RH, relative humidity. I could see the extreme fire behavior being affected by that. And I think that's changed now, right? Where you're seeing the Forest Service is now actively doing controlled burns. They're managing the forest a little different. Their logging's back a little bit to try and thin out some of the forest. Do you guys have any insight on some of that?
I know in San Diego, gosh, the last couple of years, I can tell you that we've had a lot of controlled burns out in our East County. They're doing more fire breaks just to put, that buffer if there, fire comes up on a fire break. So I think it has gotten better over the years. I do agree with you. 10, 15, 20 years ago, they weren't managing it very well. And that kind of went hand in hand with some of these really destructive wildfires, especially the Santa Ana driven ones. And I think that might have changed the thought process finally. But I know we've had some pretty good controlled burns here in San Diego to try and mitigate a heavier fire season. So I think the thought process has changed a little bit.
It's interesting to look at how those policies affect fire behavior and all those things that we're talking about. For you, Desiree, having worked at the Forest Service, any insight with that?
It's different everywhere. It just really depends on the area. I now kind of with the shorter winters and longer spring or earlier spring and longer summers, there's not a lot of time to do the controlled burns, and the conditions have to be just right for us with all the snow and the moisture. It's harder to do a controlled burn in the winter for us. So they're typically done right around now in the spring. And the problem with that is now you risk it getting away and taking off. So I've seen less controlled burns due to the change in the seasons. And we have a highway. It's actually the 223. It's off the 58 freeway, and it's just west of our helibase, our fire station. And every year they will burn that whole hillside along that highway because there's always a vehicle that pulls over or something or someone. It's a human started fire. And we try to stay on top of that and keep that area burned. I'm not sure if we've burned that area yet this year due to the early fire season or the short winter.
It's funny how those areas that burn every year like clockwork almost. We have a few of those, and it's it's going to burn, it's going to put itself out, but it's just funny that happens. This has been awesome. There's so much to get into with fire management, I guess is kind of the best way I can think to describe it. But I want to end the conversation talking about some memorable fires that you guys have been a part of. You both have had really successful careers, long careers. Can you talk about, and Desiree, I'll start with you, a memorable fire that you were a part of over the course of your career that kind of just sticks out?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs, including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
There are so many. One that comes to mind was one where I was involved on my days off helping out. The Blue Cut Fire started in, I believe it was August 2016, started mid-morning, and it was a Santa Ana day. So any other day, that fire would have been manageable, and we had everything on it. And we were in the right spot. It was in the Cajon Pass, so you have the winds funneling through there, switching, going in different directions. And just when we think, oh, the fire is going to burn back into itself, then all of a sudden it changes directions, and now it's throwing spot fires. I believe they said a half mile, but what I witnessed was at least a mile, sometimes more than that. We would see fires start. And I remember Air Attack had his hands full, and I would tell him, hey, we see this other fire out here, and we need to get resources on it. But there wasn't anyone. There was too many fires, too much fire, not enough resources. And then sometimes you get on these fires and it just gets too crowded. You don't have enough room in the dip site. You don't have the separation. And the thing that stood out with that fire was we got socked in by the smoke. Even with the winds, it was just so much smoke laying flat, blowing through that canyon, and it's riddled with wires. It was very high risk, very dangerous. but there's a lot of homes in there. And I believe they lost, it was like 100 homes, a little more. And it wasn't a very big fire. I think it only burned for like a couple days. It was 37,000 acres. But the day I was on the fire, I watched them close all these roads and not allow people access back into their homes. And all I could think of is, if that was me, I would want to get back to my home and get my animals out. So I'm being the animal lover I am. All I could think of is these people have their pets trapped in their homes. So I went off shift the next day and I just couldn't enjoy my days off. So I got in my truck. I lived in LA at the time. And I put it on some website, social media that, hey, I work with the fire department and I'm going to volunteer to help people evacuate their animals. And so people that were at the, I believe it was one of the evacuation centers, met me at the road closure for Lytle Creek. And I drove them in one by one and helped them get their pets out of their home. Animal control was out there. We were working with them, but there was only 2 of them. And there's a lot of homes back there. So for me, it was nice because I could take each homeowner in and help them get their pets out of their home, where animal control, if they go in by themselves, the pets are hiding, they don't know where to look. So that was really cool to be able to do that. And, there was this one woman, and it's funny, every time I tell the story, I usually always cheer up, and I think I'm going to try not to this time, but her husband had just passed away, and she tells me this right off the bat. My dog is in the home and I need to get him out. That was my husband's dog. It's all I have left of him. And I was like, oh. And she told me where her home was. And I thought, oh my God, this is like the worst case scenario. It was in the back of the canyon. It was the last of the homes. They were lighting backfires from the road, heading up the hill to stop the fire. And I remember thinking, I'm a pilot. I'm not a ground-based firefighter. What am I doing? And I just figured, I'm risking my truck getting burnt or melted, but I felt confident that we were going to be safe. And I was able to drive her back to her home and get her pet out. And I remember she said, oh, do I have time to get documents? And I said, nope, get your dog and we're getting out of here. And that was it. And we got out, and that was rewarding. It was very cool to be a part of that.
Yeah. You think of how close people are to their animals, and especially in a scenario like that where she's lost her husband and that's her last companion. Losing that companion would be, detrimental for sure. Really cool that you had a chance to go in there and help. That's got to be one of the most impactful things you've done over the course of your career, not just on fires.
Yeah, I mean, there's a disconnect. As a pilot, you save people's homes. You drop water, you actually prevent their home from burning, and you don't really realize the effect or what you've done. You don't see it. You're up in the air. And so there's a disconnect. And when you're there, it becomes very emotional when you're on the ground to see the emotions from the people and their gratitude and how thankful they are. And it's very empowering, and it just drives you to want to do it more, to help more. And I think that's a big part of it. There's just so much isolation as a pilot. You're just up there by yourself and you don't have that interaction with the community. So that part can be hard and kind of lonely sometimes, actually. We're not going to a lot of fires where there's other helicopters. So I don't have Tony to talk to anymore on these fires. We go to fires and sometimes we're the only helicopter there.
You're on your own.
Yeah, we're on our own out in the middle of nowhere a lot of the times.
Yeah,
wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Tony, for you, what's an impactful fire that you were a part of?
Oh gosh, the one when I get asked that question, I always bring up the Harris fire, and it was in 2007. I'll never forget it because it was, like Desiree said, it was mid-morning. The Santa Anas were already cranking. We knew they were coming, and we're flying out to a area in San Diego in our East County called Potrero. And when we got probably 15 miles out and we're getting beat with 40 to 50 knot winds, I mean, we are getting worked, and you can see the header already going up. That was one of those fires that I knew we were in trouble before we even got there. We got notified that all the fixed wing assets were not coming up because of the turbulence. So we started the first 2 or 3 hours of that fire with R2 mediums, and that was it, and ground resources. And so it was difficult just to get our guys on the ground. All they could do was go, they weren't even doing structure protection. That fire was blowing through Potrero like a freight train. It was crazy to see from the air, and all the HeliCASTS crew was doing was going house to house telling people to get out before they get burned over. Me and my partner, Dave Weldon, we tried to go get some water. We were getting beat on the water source. We finally got some water, and we go to try and make some drops. And, we have simplex tanks. Open the tank doors, water comes out, goes straight towards the tail rotor. You can't even make water drops.
Right.
So we tried a couple more times. We were hitting so many up and down drafts. At one point, I got pushed into the water, skids down to my tank, popped up, and I said, hey, we're done with the water dropping. It was getting dangerous. And we just stayed up, and we stayed over our crews in case we had to pull them out. So we got midday on that fire, and I remember distinctly seeing a brand new, the CAL FIRE big red box trucks, the crew buses, I guess you call them. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing a brand new one going towards the interior of the fire. I remember it vividly. I go, look at that brand new crew bus. It's going to get dirty. And by midday, that crew bus got all the way up into a house trying to get some people out because everybody was getting burned over. And I remember over the air, that crew bus crew got burned over, and they were deploying fire shelters. And to hear one or two of them screaming coming over the radio was gut wrenching because there was nothing you could do. And so we knew everything stopped. I think all we had was air attack, no fixed wing assets other than that. And I know he was getting beat up, and everything kind of stopped. And we tried to figure out where they were at. And I remember I volunteered, and a forestry helicopter volunteered to try and get into the interior. Long story short, the forestry copter went in first because there was so much thick smoke. We didn't go in together because we didn't want a midair. He got in first, picked up, I think, 3 or 4 of them that got burned over. He departed. I followed the wire line back in, and I was looking for the 2 homeowners. Landed, and it was like a scene out of some horror movie. I landed, and all their fire shelters were blowing in the rotor wash. And that crew bus that I saw earlier in the day was sitting there destroyed, just windows blown out, and that thing was brand new. My partner got out and tried to find one of the homeowners, and we found out later we didn't find him because he perished in his house. He didn't leave. So it was just one of those crazy fires where you couldn't stop anything. It went for a week. It burned 90,000 acres, over 250 homes burned, 8 fatalities. 4 of the firefighters got burned, went to the burn unit. And it was one of those crazy wind-driven fires that you just really can't do anything. And you just, to see it from the air it was crazy to see. Most people don't see that kind of stuff.
What you're describing, I think to myself, and seeing things for me, whether it's something gory or otherwise, isn't a big deal. But hearing, someone, their pleas for help, whether it's on the radio or in person, is gut-wrenching.
It is.
So what you're describing, I can see how that would just eat at your heart and your stomach as that's happening. And you had a front row seat to this taking place, and that's insane.
Fast forward, I want to just throw this in, just small world dynamics. About 3 years later, we get these youngsters that come and try out for our HeliTAC crew. And these are young 20-something Billy Goats that can go all day long and make all of us look bad. And one of the kids that came through was one of the kids that was on that crew bus and got burned over.
Wow.
How crazy was that? And he ended up on our HeliTAC crew.
Wow. Good for him for sticking with it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Good kid.
That I can't imagine getting burned over and having to deploy your shelter like that. That's crazy.
Things have gotten bad at that point.
Yeah. You talked about flying in Santa Ana conditions and the turbulence and the downdrafts and updrafts that come with that. And I think people that haven't flown in those kind of wind conditions can't really comprehend what that's like. You think of wind, and wind is wind, right? But can you guys describe what it's like to fly in those turbulent types of Santa Ana winds that you're describing?
It's scary, but really you just become ineffective. As Tony talked about, your water comes out and it just blows sideways. It doesn't even go down to the ground. And so it just creates more challenge trying to get closer to the ground, trying not to blow up the fire with your rotor wash, which if it's already windy, a rotor wash is nothing compared to the winds, but really just trying to predict what kind of drop is going to work to get the fire on the water. And there's times where we just have to call it and say, hey, we're not being effective at all, and we're just getting beat up out here. Changing subjects, I wanted to tag back onto something Tony said. So I was on the Esperanza fire, the one that burned in the Banning Pass, and I believe, I don't remember what year that was. That was early 2000s, and I was there as a CWN helicopter pilot, and I didn't personally know any of the guys, but it was obviously a very well-known fire. Several firefighters were killed, and later on, so I think it was like, what was it, 4 years ago? I think it was 2020. I was back contracting for the Forest Service, and I was on the Heaps Peak contract. And one of the kids on my crew is the kid from one of the men who was burned over, who at the
Isn't that
time.
crazy?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy. So it happens, and these kids are following in their parents' footsteps, regardless whether they were killed in the line of duty. They carry on that tradition, or they become even more passionate about becoming firefighters to protect other people and make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else, or whether they're doing it to honor their parent that was killed in the fire. But I remember thinking that was pretty crazy. I got the chills because I looked at him and all I could think is, wow, I didn't know your dad, but your dad's, body when he was removed from the fire flew in the helicopter that I ended up flying years later. So at the time on the fire, I was flying a Type 3 for one company. And then years later, I was flying a medium for a company out of Idaho. And that particular helicopter that I was in on a contract for 2 years was the helicopter that evacuated all of those firefighters on the Esperanza fire.
Wow.
So it was just kind of all connected.
Yeah, you were talking about Heaps Peak, and I'll circle back to that when we're offline. But interesting how small of a world it is, and
It is.
yeah, it's talking about how admirable that young man's decision was to come back and work as a heliTAC firefighter. Being that his father had passed away in that fire. I remember that fire, and I remember going to the funeral for those Forest Service firefighters. I think it was Engine 54 out of the San Bernardino National Forest, out of Idlewild. Were the crew members that perished in that fire. And that's the worst part of this whole thing when you talk about explosive fire behavior and the urban interface, the risks that these crews are assuming to stop these fires. And it's just sad.
Yeah,
But,
that was 2006, Engine 57. So that was the second year
57. Yeah.
I had been fighting fire, and yeah,
Crazy. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedules to join us to talk about this. And it's something that we'll live with indefinitely. It's just part of the byproduct of living where we do. Thank you guys for doing what you do. It's no small feat to accomplish the missions that you guys are doing out there. And I commend you for that, and look forward to meeting up at one point and having a beer, the three of us.
Yeah, we got to get Desiree down here and join us on our every couple of years, 3 times a year down in Encinitas. You got to come down and join us one time.
Let me know when.
All right, you got it.
Well, until next time, we'll catch you later.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
You guys,
All right.
take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned air medical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140-plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completions Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs. including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors. Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical HeliCASTS and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Thank you for supporting the sponsors who make these conversations possible. It was exciting to record an episode of the podcast in conjunction with Vertical Valor magazine. Our goal is to create high-quality, highly immersive content promoting the rotorcraft industry. Go to verticalmag.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, where you'll find the latest issues of Vertical Magazine, HeliTrader, and Vertical Valor magazine. You'll also find links to Vertical HeliCASTS, eVTOL, Skies magazine, RCAF Today magazine, and Insight magazine, which showcase the best of the helicopter industry. All these MHM publications contain top-notch content that you don't want to miss. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS.